Hey everybody, welcome back to Retirement Clarity Radio. I am your host, Scott Newhouse. Thank you so much for joining me. I've got a shorter episode today where I want to talk about two things that you must know about your retirement expenses. So I was reading a really great Wall Street Journal article that I have here right in my hands where the author, Glenn Rufinock, he shares one tip about retirement expenses that he wants people to know, and then he also shares a study that we're going to go over together, and I'm going to share my thoughts on the study and what it means for your retirement expenses. So let's go to Glenn's tip, and he said that it's not a rule, it's more like a guideline, something to keep in mind. And it's about how do you figure out what your monthly expenses are going to be in retirement. Now, I'm going to be working on a video. Hopefully, I get it out in the next 4 to 6 weeks titled 7 Things I Review with Every Retiree. So everything I go over with every single retiree that I speak to, whether I work with them or not. Now, near the top of that list is going to be drilling down on your retirement expenses. It's just so important to know what's going on there. You do not need a detailed budget with line items on groceries versus eating out versus subscriptions versus gas, utilities. You don't need line items, but you do need to know approximately how much you're going to spend overall on a monthly basis. Now, the author of this article, again, Glenn Rufinock, he has a guideline that he uses and he recommends other people use, which is that you can expect to spend around $400 more per month in retirement than whatever number you ultimately come up with on your approximate monthly expenses. The reason for that is because there's just going to be bills that we do not expect that's going to pop up throughout the year, and you want to give yourself a little extra wiggle room so that it's not too much of a surprise, for you and your spouse in terms of what you're budgeting for on that monthly basis. So I think that's a really great rule of thumb, and I would definitely recommend adding in that extra $400 a month wiggle room into whatever you think you're going to spend on a monthly basis. So if you think you're going to spend $4,000 a month, let's add it up to $4,400 a month. And then we'll do our math in financial projections and retirement income projections from there. So I hope that's a helpful little tip. Just give yourself a little extra wiggle room. Now, the second thing that I noticed when I was looking at his article is there was a study done, and using my very novice, very basic video editing skills, I'm going to try and put the results of the study up on the screen with me so that you can look at it as I look at it. But there was a study done showing what was the average annual spending of people by age in retirement. And they were looking specifically at people who had $1 to $3 million in investable assets. And it does include people partially working, at least for a little bit. So that was the study looking at what are these people spending throughout the rest of their lives. Now, I do want to say, for those of us who do not have $1 million or $2 million or $3 million in our investment accounts, that's fine. What we want to look at is the general trend of what these people are spending. I think that's really important, even if the dollar amounts that we spend might be a little bit less than what these folks spend. Because again, they've got $1 to $3 million. Maybe they can spend a little bit more than someone who has 500,000 or 750 or whatever it is you have in investable assets. So again, I'm going to put this up on the screen and let's go through it together. So you see between ages 60 and 64, people are spending just over $102,000. Then in the second half of their 60s, so 65 to 69, that number drops significantly right away to just under $94,000. That's a pretty big drop right there. As people go into their 70s, it drops a little bit between ages 70 and 74 to $90,320. And then in the latter half of their 70s, it has another significant drop to $83,460. So are you noticing a trend here? I really, really hope you are. Let me finish this off before I share my own 2 cents on what's going on here. So in their early 80s, folks, their spending drops again to around $77,170 a year. And then between 85 and 89, we finally see retirement expenses increase by a modest amount, around $2,000, up to $77,380 a year. It stays approximately the same from ages 90 to 94, and then it has a pretty decent increase a little, just a little under 4,000 from ages 95 and above. So what in the world is going on here, and why does Scott think this is so important for me to look at and understand? First, I want to point out, even among people who have plenty of money, between $1 and $3 million, their expenses go down in retirement. I've said this before on this show, but there have been numerous studies like this one that we're looking at right now that show that retirees on average spend less on an inflation-adjusted basis every single year. Now, this groups it together by like 4 or 5 year increments, but on a year-to-year basis, your expenses are most likely going to go down in retirement adjusted for inflation. The second thing that I see going on here is that in your 60s, that's going to be the decade when you are going to spend the most in retirement, and rightfully so. You are likely healthy, hope you are. You've got some newfound freedom that you didn't have before since you just quit your job, and you've got the money. Now, sure, you do not want to go overboard with your spending, but you should absolutely be spending money on things that bring you joy and happiness in your 60s. The second thing that I see is that once we get to our 70s, there's going to be a drop-off in spending. And that's likely because you've done a lot of your fun bucket list activities in your 60s, which you should. And you're likely also in a groove in your retirement and your retirement expenses. You know what you want to spend money on. You know what's important to you to spend money on. And you don't need to spend as much on things that are not as important to you. The last thing that I notice here is that at some point in your 80s, your expenses are likely going to go up, and you are simply going to need that money for, take a guess, what do you think, what expenses do you think is going to go on up in your 80s? If you guessed healthcare, yes, you're absolutely right. As we get older, we're simply going to need to go to the hospital more, get more prescription drugs, just all of those things that come up with aging. It's going to result in a financial hit to us. So your expenses are going to go up at some point if you live long enough. Hopefully you do, and that's going to go to healthcare. So let me talk about my takeaways from this, and then we'll get on with the rest of our day. So my takeaway from this, number one, is I want you to put a little extra wiggle room into your monthly budget when you're calculating your retirement expenses. I think $400 a month is great. Number two, as long as you've got a plan and the numbers make sense in your overall plan, I think you should feel free to spend more money in your 60s and your early 70s when you've got the health and you've got the vitality and you've got those bucket list items that are important to you, knowing that in all likelihood your expenses are going to go down pretty dramatically for the rest of your retirement. The third thing that I want you to keep in mind is that if we live long enough, we might have some extra expenses due to healthcare. But even considering that, look at this chart again. Even considering that, it's unlikely that with these increased healthcare expenses, it's unlikely that your expenses are going to rise to what they were back in your 60s or even early 70s. And so that's pretty good to kind of have in like your back pocket, knowing that, hey, yeah, I might be spending a little more than I'm comfortable with in your 60s, but my expenses are going to drop dramatically, and I'm likely never going to spend this much again in the rest of my life. So I hope those 2 tips are really helpful in you thinking about and understanding and planning for your retirement expenses. This is actually all I have for today. I hope you all have a great day. If you are watching on YouTube, please give me a like and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. So I will see you next time.